Welcome back to another week of Kernel at the Buzzer. We want to remind you that all the opinions of everyone on this podcast are the opinion of the speaker and the speaker alone and do not reflect the opinion of the entire Kernel. I'm your host, Colton Johnson, and this week it is once again all Kentucky basketball. The men's team beat Lipscomb by a score of 97-68, and the women's team got it done against both Louisville and Purdue for a win, and all of that and more is coming up next. Welcome back to another week of Kernel at the Buzzer. I have two glorious guests. Gentlemen, introduce yourself, please.
I am Cole Parke, and I'm the sports editor.
I'm Kai McClelland. I'm head of women's basketball.
Keeping it on theme this week, we're not going to talk about this football team unless they can somehow pull off a miraculous upset in Austin, which, we're neither here nor there. Is probably not going to happen.
Hey.
Let's talk about this men's basketball team first. They took on Lipscomb, the Lipscomb Bison, which apparently the Bisons, which is a grammatical atrocity in every single sense of how the English language works.
I've lived my whole life thinking they were just bison, and they're bisons, plural. So I don't like that at all.
I remember two people were talking about it, and they were like the Lipscomb Bisons, and I was like, you must be mistaken.
They put out a whole post on social media specifying, we are not North Dakota State. We are the Bisons, not bison. And I was like, oh.
It's painful. Now, I know you were not able to make it, but did you watch it last night?
Of course I did. I did the buzzer gamer on it.
Tell me what you saw, sir.
I saw a Kentucky basketball team that did something that Calipari's teams could not, and they did not have a big game hangover, quite frankly. I mean, I don't know why I even expected them to with Mark Pope at the helm, but coming off a massive win over Duke, you have a week off, then you play a team like Lipscomb. No disrespect to the Bisons, but it's easy to understand why a team, especially one that's ranked in the top 10 now, would overlook this opponent. I mean, I think Arkansas overlooked them in their first game of the season. Calipari's Arkansas Razorbacks struggled a little bit against Lipscomb in their opener, but Kentucky came out and immediately applied the pressure. But what was most significant to me was not just the offensive success, but the defensive success. I mean, you can attribute some of that, sure, to Lipscomb just having a bad shooting night, which they did. They had a really bad shooting night. They did. But Kentucky, I guess what I'm getting at, Kentucky came out after the biggest win of this team's career. For some of these players, the biggest win of their ever.
Other than maybe Lamont.
Maybe for a handful of these players. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that Amari has a win this big at Drexel, this team came out after the biggest win of some of these guys' careers, back home against a bye-game opponent, and clamped up defensively. They played hard defense for the entire game. They had good offense for the entire game, and they absolutely blew Lipscomb out of the water. The final ended up being a bit closer because they started putting in some of the bench guys, kind of pumping the brakes a little bit. They were up by like 37 points late in this game, so that's significant. Some
numbers for you: Jackson Robinson, who's supposed to be the scoring, the offensive leader of this team, at 20.7 rebounds. I'll take it away. 14 points in the 4 boards. Amari Williams almost had the double-double with 9 points and 11 rebounds. And a guy that I really, really want to focus on, Kobe Brea. 12 points, but he was 3 for 3 from beyond the three-point line, and in dominating fashion leads the entire country in three-point percentage at dang near 80%, 10 percentage points above the second-ranked player, which I forget his name, and I will butcher it because he is from Europe if I try. A dang near 20 percentage points above Mississippi State's Josh Hubbard, who is the closest to him in the SEC. Gentlemen, talking about this guy and the catalyst that he is and what we thought he was going to be coming into Kentucky, what is he?
Yeah, I mentioned it before. I saw a tweet that was pretty funny online. It said Kobe Brea is what we thought Kellen Grady was going to be at Kentucky. I mean, he went 3 for 3 from beyond the arc in this Lipscomb game. That's not the first time he's gone perfect from beyond the arc this season. But I also talked about it with you. It's almost funny how there hasn't been a single game where watching it I'm like, Kobe Brea is insane. But then you look at the box score and you're done, and it's like, this guy is efficient, and he is efficient in a way that you don't even notice when it's happening sometimes. He's he's a lethal scoring threat. He can pass the ball. He has no turnovers, I think you'd mentioned.
Yeah, 0.
And he does it without even being the star on the court most of the time. So, I mean, when you talk about this Kentucky team, how are you supposed to prepare for a team who has guys like Kobe Brea who don't even immediately pop on the scouting report maybe, who aren't even like the guy who's getting those 20 points like a Jackson or an Ortega, but are still just killing you from beyond the arc? I mean, this guy, he's something special here at Kentucky.
I do have a question for you. Do you think, like, his ability to be this good, and you mentioned earlier, like, not being flat coming out after that Duke win, do you think that's simply because of coaching style? Do you think, like, if this was a Calipari-led team, that Kobe Brea wouldn't be this good, or that they would have come out flat against Lipscomb?
I think it's possible. I mean, we all saw the post that Calipari would have lost the Duke game, and I agree. I think that it's a combination, though. I think that part of it is Pope, sure, his system and the way he motivates these guys, but also it's the guys themselves, because Pope was very deliberate in the guys he picked for this team. I feel like he picked guys who wanted to buy in mentally, who wanted, this team is very, very good, right? They're number 9 in the country, but I don't think it's harsh to say that Calipari would not have got some of these guys. He wouldn't even looked at some of these guys, quite frankly. But this team as a whole buys into that mentality. And I think you can put a lot of that on Pope, the way he coaches them, the way he leads them, his experience, but it's also on the players to buy in. I mean, a coach can get you ready for a game, but it's up to you to actually care about playing against Lipscomb. And every player on this team came out like they actually cared to play against Lipscomb. I mean, we saw Colin Chandler hike a football through his legs. I think at one point he threw the ball through his legs to get that big dunk. I mean, everyone that checked into this game checked in ready to play as if this was Duke all over again. I mean, they took this team seriously.
Now, getting into some of the talking points, and some that we're trying not to just beat a dead horse here, because there's, at some point there's a finite amount of talking points, but we're trying to hash some new ones. I feel like there's always been this narrative ever since Pope got here that it's the first time in a while that Kentucky fans have watched a good team. They've watched plenty of good players that are sensational, some of the best that have ever walked this planet. But very seldom has there been that cohesive nature that I think this team has. But because if you look at a guy like Andrew Carr, he was the highlight of the Duke game. He had, came out guarding flag, which was, I thought was a mistake, but neither here nor there. But, he had the 17 points, and he was just making big play after big play, and they go into the Lipscomb game, and obviously, there's a different aura around it or surrounding that game, but he goes in and he has 2 points. It's not crazy. Look at the plus minus. He's tied for the best on the team with Jackson Robinson. So for both of y'all, what is it like seeing a team like this that has so many guys that at any given point could just explode?
Well, to credit to like what Cole was saying earlier, it's like Andrew Carr's been doing this. He was just at Wake Forest. So it takes a Mark Pope to go out and find that guy that has a mentality to have a game like that against Duke. And, even so early into the season, you see how balanced the team is. You see the care of everybody. Seems like everybody wants to play the right brand of basketball. Like Jackson Robinson could have had that, 1-point game, right, against Duke and completely, lost it, but he comes back out and drops 20. Obviously, it's Lipscomb, but, to have that kind of character surrounding yourself, and then to also be consistent with it, having easy games coming up, I think it's just that's why fans care, because they see they care.
Well, I pulled up one of the stories I wrote after that Duke game, highlighting the Jackson Robinson performance, the 1 point he had, and something that really stuck out to me from that. There's 2 quotes I'd like to read to you that I have in this story that the players themselves said. So someone kind of asked, talking to Andrew, you came out and had a big game against Duke. I mean, you were familiar with Duke, but a lot of your biggest stars didn't. So, what is that like to be able to lead the team? And Carr kind of immediately pushed back on that notion that he did this. He said, this team we have in general is just so talented. We're just going to keep coming at you guys throughout the game over and over again. Whether it's going to be Ortega, me, and Amari tonight, it's going to be Brandon, Jackson, and Kerr the next night. That's what makes our team special. His instinct was not to take the credit for this big win, not even to highlight his own performance, just to say, it was just my night. Next night it's going to be someone else's, and it was. He highlighted maybe next night it's Jackson's. Well, against Lipscomb it was Jackson's night, 20 point. And then later on, Ortega also said, He said, wearing Kentucky on your chest, you just have to carry yourself a certain way. You know that you're not just playing for yourself, you're playing for a whole nation, and you're playing for your brothers. It's a dream to play for Kentucky, and it just makes everyone play harder. And I think that's really special because that's kind of what Kentucky fans have been clamoring about for so long. Thinking about the Mark Pope introductory press conference, I said in a column that he scratched every itch Kentucky fans had. And I think that that's very true. The name on the front of the jersey has to be more important than the name on the back if you're going to be a successful team. Now, if you're a successful player, like Calipari would recruit, these 5-star guys who are going to be number 1 overall lottery picks, maybe it's not as important. But if you're going to be a successful basketball team, the name on the front has to be more important than the name on the back. And I think you can see that with this team. I mean, they haven't had a single game so far where you couldn't just pull offensive highlight reels and just see 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes more than that passes. These guys moving the ball around, these guys sharing the rock with each other. I think it's significant. This game against Lipscomb was the very first time this year that they didn't score 100 points on their home floor. And they could have. They easily could have, but Mark Pope told them to hold the ball at the end there. 97. But that's the first time they haven't cracked 100 points on their home court, which is kind of wild.
Crazy
3 games
stat,
in.
Yeah.
And then defensively, they just buy in. I mean, this Kentucky team, I don't know how many more times I can say that it's special, but it's really, really special.
In the same sense, because I know there's always the positive notion around this team. There's been plenty of it, and honestly, there's been nothing but that. From you, because I know we haven't had time to talk much about the things you don't like, but I feel like as your job as a journalist, skepticism is a necessity. So from what you've seen in these opening games, obviously there's no way a team is perfect to their first 5 games, especially the one that's kind of been thrown together like this one. But what have you not liked?
I would say early on, especially in some of the scrimmages, maybe their first game, there was a little bit of concerns I saw defensively. That scared me a little bit. Now, for the most part, they've been strong defensively. I would say that there are times when they get a little bit tired. You can see it especially on Amari, for example, in the Duke game, when these guys can get fatigued and they can let some easy buckets go in. It's notable to me that they held Lipscomb to just 26 in the first half and allowed 42 in the second. And sure, you can say some of that is they were up by big. They didn't care as much. But it's still something that matters. Lipscomb, if you would just look at their second half, they were on pace to score 84 points, and you should not be letting up 84 points against a Lipscomb Bison's team, even if you're on track to score 108, if you're just looking at Kentucky's second half. I just feel like Lipscomb scored 1 less point in the second half than Kentucky did in the first. Now, it didn't really matter because they only scored 26 in the first half, but the point I'm making is this is a team that is good defensively, and they show that they can play really strong defensively, but you have to keep that mental focus for every single minute of this game, all 40 minutes. And sometimes I feel as though this team can let that slip either when they're up big or when they're getting really, really tired, as we saw against Duke. I mean, it isn't lost on me that this team got a big win against Duke. They did what they needed to. But some of that's because Duke shot itself in the foot. If Duke didn't have those turnovers by Cooper Flagg, if Duke didn't miss some of the shots it missed, Duke still wins that game, even though Kentucky was better coached, I thought, even if it played harder at times, I thought. Duke had every chance to win that game anyway and still lost it. So we need to see this team play some more big opponents. We need to see this team play a team who's just on for the entire – see how they handle a team that just isn't missing those shots like some of these teams have been. But like you said, there's been way more positives to take away from it. This is a 4-0 basketball team that, apart from the close Duke game, has blown out every opponent they've played. But it's also a team that, apart from that Duke game, against a team that did shoot itself in the foot, they haven't really played anybody yet, and I still need to see them prove themselves more. So I'm really excited to see how they start December, going Clemson and Gonzaga back-to-back.
To go off of that, I think, I mean, I don't want to say I just straight up disagree, but, you know, these Jackson State games, these Western Kentucky games that are coming up, it's like that foot has got to be on the gas pedal, and you got to treat them like they're the best talent, because even though Clemson's like straight up struggled with EKU the other night, Clemson, it's at Clemson, it's a SEC, ACC challenge on ESPN. It's going to be a big
team
game.
That just came off an Elite Eight run too.
Yeah, and then, you know, there's always arguments about how good Gonzaga truly is, but you're going to have Gonzaga.
They're legit this year.
Okay.
Blew out Baylor.
And then, you know, Louisville, Ohio State, like those are winnable games. But the point I'm getting at is, like, you got to treat Jackson State like they're, you know, like they're Gonzaga, and you have to go out there and play like that every single night.
Now, one of the things that's kind of been glaring at me, and like one of the conversations that I want to open up here, is I think there's always this inevitable curse with teams that are so heavy on beyond the arc shooting. I think we saw it. We've seen it these past couple of years with Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Nados just has them like it's the same thing. They're like Kentucky. They'll have 30 attempts from three, but they're going to sink 15 of them. They're going to sink 10 of them. And those 30 points go a long way. But on the flip side of that, there's going to be games.
The old expression is you can beat anybody, but you can also lose to anybody on any given night.
There's going to be those games where the ball's just not going in the dang hoop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on like you saw with Alabama last year. They lost plenty of games that they shouldn't have lost because the dang ball, like Vanderbilt had them close down multiple times just because they couldn't get the ball in the hoop. And I wonder with this team if and when that does happen, because it's going to happen. It's not like if and when that does happen, will they be able to close that discrepancy in paint points? Because that's been an area of this game that they've been really dominated in this year. Will they be able to recover from a bad shooting night?
No, I agree. That's something that I highlighted at the beginning of the year, actually, that exact same notion. I touched on that, I think, in my preview for the season or my predictions or something like that. I'm well aware, teams that are very heavily reliant on the three, you can beat anybody in the country any given night when you're hitting. But you can also lose to a really bad team when you're not hitting. Mm-hmm. I would say the Duke game has alleviated some of my concerns there for me because even though I highlighted it in my, I think, Jackson piece maybe, even though they ended up getting a lot of three-pointers off, they ended up hitting a healthy amount, more than I actually thought they did when I looked at the box score. There were large swaths of that game where they weren't hitting three-pointers. They were kind of forced to play more of a low game, and we saw guys like Lamont, guys like Otega have to drive in a lot more. Guys like Carr have to get those down low and one plays, and I think that they've shown they're very capable of doing it. It made me feel a lot better to see them able to do that against Duke. I don't know that they would have beat Duke if that's all they had, but they've shown that they can play that brand of basketball. I said it was definitely a Jackson piece, I think. Or perhaps it wasn't. I don't know. We'll see. But I said in one of those pieces, I was like, for all intents and purposes, Duke made them play a brand of basketball that they hadn't built their identity on for large portions of that game and still lost. Mm-hmm. And again, you can blame some of that on Duke, but I think that this Kentucky team has shown that they can play different styles of basketball when they need to, and that the three ball will eventually start falling regardless, because there's been a couple games this year where they were just not hitting until they were. And I think that really has made me feel a lot more comfortable saying this team has a really high ceiling. It's made me feel comfortable saying that they're a second weekend, maybe even, God forbid, make it further than the second weekend of the NCAA tournament kind of team. I don't know that I'm willing to go that far yet, but at least second weekend, as opposed to the concerns I had at the start of the year that this might be a really, really fun basketball team that gets stunned in the second round when they have a bad shooting night.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all credit to Mark Pope, though, because even though he has so much emphasis on this, D-ball shooting, like you said, against that Duke game, you have to adapt against those big opponents. And, he did that. And I think it's deemed down to the matchups. It's like, if it's like a North Carolina team especially, or a Louisville team that can't guard the perimeter, you're going to let it fly, and then, you adjust from there. But, yeah, I just say all credit to the coaching for that.
Well, I mean, you got to remember Mark Pope is a former big man himself. I mean, the three ball, this high power, fast paced offense is what he's kind of built his brand on as a coach. But when it comes down to what his specialty is, it's that down low kind of stuff. That's what he did. That's how he helped Kentucky win a national title in 1996, is by playing that brand of basketball.
So true. Looking at these next three games, Jackson State, Western Kentucky, Georgia State. I feel like for the last, it's kind of there's some softball pitches there, and they're a little bit like warm-ups to get you ready for SEC, ACC. What needs to be cleaned up in the next 3-4 games? Because I feel like I'm not putting Clemson in that conversation. In the next 3 games, what needs to be cleaned up preparing for Gonzaga?
Yeah, I mean, ideally you score 100 points in all these games. Shout out to the Western Kentucky game. We'll have the Colonel's very own Samantha Money coming back to Lexington for that one. But I know. I'm excited for these games just to see how they continue to gel. I think the biggest thing that these games are going to bring you is continuing to get the fans involved, continuing to gel as a team, continuing to try stuff out. You talked about how these games are going to start getting tougher, and you have a couple more freebies after those Gonzaga games, but this is kind of some of your last chances to try stuff out. by the time you get into SEC play, by the time you get into those, those bigger games to start December, you really need to know fully what you are, what you can do, and what you want to do. So these are kind of your last 3 games to try some stuff out. Again, get guys like Trent Noah, Colin Chandler, Travis Perry involved, see how they can kind of do things. I don't know that we'll see them a ton come SEC play just by the way this team is built. So get them some reps, get them ready for hopefully all 3 of those guys being back next year. And really continue to build this team as a stronger unit. Keep these guys close. I think it was I forget which player said, I think it was Carr who said it in one of my pieces I quoted. He said, the closer we are, the harder it is to break us. So keep this team close, keep this team playing a fun brand of basketball, keep this team healthy, and just do what you know you're capable of doing in these 3 games. I really think you just need to go all out, blow out these 3 opponents, show that you are Kentucky, you deserve to be in that top 10, and really get your confidence full going into some of your actual more difficult games in your non-conference slate.
I completely agree with that. I think especially with all 3 games being at Rupp, that's when, fans have to be involved. You have to showcase what the team's all about. And just going back to what I said earlier, you have to treat them like they're any other opponent, like that can compete. And you have to go out there and, score 100 points like Cole said, but also not, sit back and goof off when we're up 18. We can let up a little bit. It's like, you got to make sure, you have all your sets figured out. You have all your defensive and offensive schemes, set in stone, because if you don't have them against Clemson or Gonzaga coming up, that could be a very close game that could get out of hand if, like you said again, if those shots don't fall.
Well, I also think, too, it's well known that blue gets in. Kentucky fans travel really well. But when you look at December, they go to Clemson, they go to Seattle, and they have to go to New York for the CBS Sports Classic.
There's Kentucky fans in Seattle.
Yeah, but
that's like crazy.
You're really kind of – we saw how Rupp Arena was for a Lipscomb game last night. It was surprisingly good for a Lipscomb game. Probably, But this is where you're going to really convince these guys, look at what we can do. Now let's all go down to Clemson. Let's pack out Clemson's arena as much as we can. Let's, get people buying plane tickets to Seattle. Let's get people going to New York around Christmas time to go. Get these fans to really buy into this team even more than they already have. The fans have been responding to this team great. It's not a concern that this team has, as opposed to some other schools that are having that problem. But, make sure keep the fans involved, keep the fans happy, keep that energy high, and then make sure you have a more favorable atmosphere when you do have to go on the road 3 times in December.
It's a great preview, I think, though, because, when you have, Alabama and Rupp later this year, that place is going to be roaring. Coach Cal's going to be coming back, so it's automatically already seeing it now. It's you just kind of get chills thinking about what the future holds.
A bit of an abrupt transition. I want to talk about this women's team, the other undefeated team at this university, and looking at highlighting the Louisville game and the Purdue-Fort Wayne game. While they are both very different narrative-wise, you have one that went really, really well, and one that you had some what are we doing here? Those type of moments. But I think, and I want y'all's opinion on this. And through that all, I think this team has identified the 4 players. And I know obviously the 5th one that's of major significance that'll come through, but the 4 players being Georgia A. Moore, Tiana Key, Deja Lawrence, and Clara Strack. You got to get that right. There's different ones there. Now, in looking at this, and in looking and how Kentucky has not really had, let alone the caliber of player that these are by themselves, because we had Aja Petty, Madison Sure last year. There are 3 players on this team, maybe 4 on this team, that are better than any player that's been on this Kentucky roster since Ryan Howard. And I just want y'all's opinion on
that. I kind of compare it to the men's team. Mark, we were talking about how Mark Pope brought in that whole, players who want to win, not the best player that's available. And Coach Brooks, has stated that, saying he brought in players that want to win. And they go out there on a nightly basis and talk about that Purdue-Fort Wayne game. Georgia had made 1 shot. Clara had made 1 shot. And it's that's your team's 2 leading scorers. And then Georgia has a 20-point second half, along with Cassidy Rowe, the Lexington Sweetheart, and you go out there and, it shouldn't have been a close game to begin with, but it's still, that night happened and you're kind of flat coming off that big Louisville win, and you still go out there and have a big performance. I asked her after the game, like, what did you tell yourself at halftime? Like, making one shot, I can't imagine you're too confident. And she's like, I didn't even think about it. She's like, I knew, like, I just go out there. Me and Coach Brooks are so confident. We played, 4 years together now. Like, I know what we're going to do. And they're saying how they're one step ahead of them, and they're still going out there and winning by double digits. So,
yeah, I thought that you can look at the Purdue-Fort Wayne game and get a little bit of concerns when you see that it felt like at times when Georgia was flat, the team as a whole was flat. But at the end of the day, they did what they needed to do. They got out of there with the win. I think the Louisville game is a lot more indicative of how special this team can truly be. This is a very tough Louisville team. I don't care that they dropped down to 25 in the rankings. Yeah. They were ranked higher than Kentucky. They were 18 in the country going into this game. You bring them into your house, and not only do you put up a good contest, it goes to overtime. And I think that there's something to be said about a good team going to overtime. A lot of teams can get someone to overtime, and then when it gets there, they kind of fold. You saw it with Kentucky last year against Texas A&M when they just fell apart in overtime. This team won the game in overtime. So not only did it show that kind of resilience, that kind of toughness that it has to even get the game there in the first place, but when you have to play extra minutes, when you have to, get deeper in your bag to find the last little bit of energy you got, this team showed it had more than Louisville did. And I think that that's something that we haven't seen from a Kentucky team in a long time. Even Ryan Howard's team, there was a few games that, they just let slip away. They just let get away from them, and they didn't have what it takes. You saw they lost in the first round to Princeton with the number 1 overall pick in the WNBA draft. Yeah. So this is something that I don't know that we've seen out of Kentucky women's basketball in a long time, maybe even since Matthew Mitchell was head coach at this program. I think that kind of piggybacking off a little bit what Kai was saying, it's Kenny Brooks kind of took a very similar approach. He brought in players who are going to buy into this system, buy into this brand, and buy into what is asked of them on any given night. And, despite a struggling performance against Purdue-Fort Wayne, so far at every chance they've been asked, they've responded to the challenge. They've done what they needed to do, and they're still perfect because of it.
Now, one storyline that I kind of want to highlight, because I think everyone that's familiar with this team, that follows this team, coming into the season, one of the big headlines was, we got a 6'7" center. In the past couple games, we've seen very limited sample size, and I don't know if you have some insight on why that is, but
it's one of those things where she's young and she just can't run. She doesn't have the conditioning to play against, that Louisville team. I thought she would play more against Purdue-Fort Wayne, but again, it was one of those closer games, so you have to lean on your, 100%. I can rely on this player to be in right now. I'm not too scared of the fact that she isn't going to be able to compete for the rest of the year. I think it's just one of those things where Coach Brooks is like, kind of subtly letting her know it's early and it's obviously you're not ready yet to go out there and, play big minutes. You can squeeze in here and there and have your impact. When she was on the court early in the season, just to make a funny reference, it was barbecue chicken. Like, just straight, like, you'd give her the ball, she would turn around and lay it in. And it was like, you'd chuckle, like, just watching it because she wouldn't miss. She was shooting high percentage, and then she would stand there and a guard would beat her, and she'd just turn around and slap it off the back of the backboard. So it's just like she has the talent. It's just the conditioning, getting her up to speed. And she is a freshman too. So I just think as time goes on, we're going to see, her get more adjusted to the college basketball, play style, and getting used to the speed. And, I'm not Coach Brooks, I don't know, but I'd assume that she will be a big part of the team going forward.
I would say that I think it's easy for people to get in the trap. I think that both college men's and women's basketball are great, right? But while they're the same sport, fundamentally they're different at the same time.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's something that gets kind of lost in people because women's basketball players aren't going to play the same way the men's do because women's basketball players are by default in college longer. A men's player can come and be a freshman in college, play a good year, and then go on. Women's players have to kind of develop in college. Is it 21 you have to be to enter the WNBA draft?
I'm pretty sure.
I think so, which is usually junior, senior year. So, a lot of times people get kind of frustrated, I think, when you see women's basketball players, especially these big-time 5-star freshmen, these Euro stars coming in here and playing, and they're like, well, why are they not doing this? Why are they not doing that? And I think that Kenny Brooks is a very well-established coach at this level. He did a lot of really, really great things with Virginia Tech, and he puts a lot of emphasis on development of players and playing them when they need to be played. So I would certainly like to see more of Silva. I'd like to see her do some more things, see what she can do, but also she's coming back next year. Unless she enters the transfer portal, she'll be back next year. She can develop into a stronger player. Maybe there's a few things he wants to work with her on. Maybe there's a few things that he sees in practice that he's not quite confident in yet. So I think that there's a lot of room to say that she could be doing more, but also just fundamental differences of the game. She doesn't necessarily need to be doing more right now.
I know he alluded to her being 6'7" all her life, and he was kind of jokingly saying she's scared of towering over people and running someone over. And he was talking about how she got 2 quick fouls in one of the beginning games, and he's like, hey, those weren't on you, those were on me. Go run through somebody. And that's established. It's perfectly fine that he has all the trust in the world for her, but going back, it's just a conditioning thing right now. She's gonna take years to develop. It's not like she's gonna continue to come out here and average 5 blocks a night, because that's just something no one's ever seen before.
He had a quote that made me laugh in Jenna Lifshin's piece about how she was doing. He said, she's as skilled as any player I've ever had at that position. She's also taller than any player I've ever had at that position. That's kind of funny to me, the way he put emphasis on that. But I think that there's certainly, on both the player and the coach, kind of learning that goes into how she's going to fit into this team and how to maximize what she brings to the table with this team. And that's something I think Kenny Brooks is good at finding. We saw what he did at Virginia Tech, how he took players and put them in the best positions to be successful. But when you have a player like Silva, who's kind of just an anomaly, this freak athlete, this had the most blessed genes in women's basketball. I don't know, but I think that there's a learning curve involved for both the team and her to kind of see how can we maximize your potential and how can we put you in a place to succeed while not making you kind of have to go out there and struggle initially.
And part of it too is I was kind of thinking about it, Strack and Key can hit those 3-point shots too. And I've seen spots where Silva, is timid to take that mid-range shot. So I think that's a big part of it as well, keeping that 5-out offense.
Now, the women's team has a completely different narrative for the next couple of games. So
it gets rough real quick.
So they have 2 ranked games out of their next 3, Illinois and the latter half of their Music City Classic, as well as North Carolina in the SEC ACC Challenge. Briefly, because we're wrapping things up here, what are y'all expecting in these next 3 games from the Cats?
Arizona State game is going to be a blowover. Kentucky's really highly favored there, and I'm expecting a quick little easy blowout. Illinois is very balanced, and that's scary to say about a team when they can do everything on the court offensively and defensively. I think the fact that it's neutral gives favor to Kentucky a little bit. The game I'm scared for most is North Carolina, because that's a team that has good guards.
There's not any bias involved in this, is there?
No bias at all, I swear. It's at North Carolina, and that's just going to first away game of the year. Counting, Nashville as a neutral court, but truly playing at an opponent's home arena, it's going to be a test to see what they can do. I don't know how crazy they get at Chapel Hill for women's basketball, but I'd assume that, having one of the highest-ranked teams, they're going to show out.
Homecoming for Tiani Key as well.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. I'm kind of scared for that one. I'm going to leave it up in the air and not say anything about it, but it's going to be a good one. That's the first big game of the year.
I kind of really agree with a lot of what you said there. The Arizona State game is going to be a blowout. Now, I would say the Illinois game, that one's kind of interesting because it's in Nashville. It's a neutral site, and I think we've really seen Kentucky fans start to embrace this team in a lot of ways. So it was sold out for Louisville. So I think you could actually see quite a few Kentucky fans down there in Nashville. A good home, almost favorable atmosphere for Kentucky. I think it is very possible Kentucky goes there and beats Illinois. I'm not going to call it. I wouldn't put money on it necessarily, but I could easily see them winning that game. I do have a lot of concerns about the North Carolina game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe I don't have as much love in my heart for North Carolina as Kai does here, but North Carolina at Chapel Hill, basketball is a passion there, and it's at North Carolina. That's not one you're going to get Kentucky fans packing out. That's going to be a North Carolina packed game. It's going to be a very hostile atmosphere. It's going to be the first time they probably ever have a truly hostile atmosphere. And I just think about something that Mark Pope said after the Duke game. He said, paraphrasing here, he said, "I like my team. I like we won this game. But if we had lost this game, I would still like my team." Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm not going to try to pull out moral victories for this team, but I think that there is easily a scenario in which Kentucky goes down to Chapel Hill and loses, but we still feel confident in it because of either the way it lost or how close it was or how it handled that adversity. I mean, you can't really get blown out in either of these games, but I don't think, there's so much emphasis on both these teams being perfect. Neither of these teams are going to finish the season without a single loss. I'll sit in that. That's just not going to happen. They're going to lose games, and if you're going to find a game you're going to lose, this North Carolina one is about as good a one as you can get, I think. And get yourself that confidence, get yourself that boost, learn how to play in a hostile road atmosphere before you get into SEC play. Then you can kind of regroup, then you can kind of work on getting stronger together, and then maybe you face them again in the tournament. Maybe you beat them the second time. I don't know.
No, I know you can't always look back on these, but Kenny Brooks 10-2 against North Carolina in his career.
It's interesting.
He's seen North Carolina before, so
I just really want to see. I really want to see a big game from Tiani Key. I want to see her go back and I want to
poetic.
I would also like to see how the fans react to her. I mean, I want to see how they treat her.
I dare to say, but obviously Georgia's the main scorer and Clara's out there doing her part, but night and night again, Tiani is showing up defensively. I mean, I'm pretty sure right now after that another 5-block game, she'll be leading the SEC in blocks. And I mean, that's just quite impressive. And then almost a double-double to go along with it, 9 rebounds. She's been this team's most consistent player. And, for her to play against her former school is going to be very entertaining to see.
Nothing but optimism from the Peanut Gallery. Gentlemen, I want to thank y'all for both coming on. It's been awesome. It's been a pleasure. Cole, all the valuable time of yours, my expert witness of college basketball, thanks for coming on. And it's been awesome. We will see y'all next week. We want to thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Kernel at the Buzzer. We'll be back with plenty more next week after Kentucky football takes on the Texas Longhorns with myself and our very own sports editor Cole Parke heading down to cover that one. But until then, I want to encourage you to head on over to KYKernel.com or KYKernel Sports on Twitter or X for all of your UK athletics coverage. And until then, I'm Colton Johnson, and we'll see you next time.